So let me just start off by saying welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us tonight. Um, I'm Tom McShane. I'm a board member of the Mass Conservation Voters, and I have been lucky enough to be chosen to be the moderator for tonight. So I'm very excited about this. I'd also like to introduce Kim Orr from Durand and Astus Associates. Kim, if you could just wave your hand so people can see you. Um, and Kim has been kind enough to agree to run this technically, since wisely they know that I totally mess it up. And we'd all be, God knows, on what social media platform if I tried to do it. So thank you, Kim, for doing that. Um, I'd like to also quickly introduce Michelle Hans, for those of you who don't know. Michelle and Karen Charles are the co-chairs of Mass Parks for All. And Michelle has also previously served on the DCR Stewardship Council. She and her husband own and manage both a landscape construction and a landscape maintenance company. So she's a very busy woman, but she gives so much time to us. And Michelle, on behalf of Mass Packs for All, if you'd like to say hello to people.
Oh, thanks, Tom. It's great to have finally be at this place because we knew that the bond bill was coming out and there was a lot of effort went into behind the scenes, and we appreciated the administration's efforts to listen to us. And now we have the final document. And I just want to say to everybody that is in our group that we will be following this very closely, and we will be back in touch with you, of course, when it comes time to finance this. And we need all our help in order to get these projects off the ground. So thank you very much, everyone, for being here.
Thanks, Michelle. Next up, we have Doug Peasy. For those of you who don't know, Doug is our executive director. He's the executive director of both Mass Parks for All and Mass Conservation Voters. He is a communications consultant who's previously worked as a reporter, which he reminds us all the time of, and worked in state government for quite a while in both communications and legislative work for Secretary Durand and others. And Doug will explain a little bit about why we're here tonight and what we hope to accomplish. Doug?
All right. Thank you, Tom, for that wonderful introduction. And we have a brief slideshow that we're going to run through here. And I want to welcome everyone and thank you for attending tonight's summit. Mass Parks for All is the only statewide charitable corporation focused primarily on our state parks and other DCR assets. Next slide, please. In 2021, a comprehensive special commission report drove home the point that we desperately needed a statewide NGO to champion our long neglected parks. Next slide, please. The pandemic also served to highlight this need. I remember being out and about in the community on a bicycle in every little nook and cranny parking lot in any kind of conservation land was full of cars. And I think once people discovered these beautiful jewels in their communities, they did not stop going to them. Next slide, please. The growth of DCR's operations budget from 2018 to now speaks to what can happen when advocates and state government work hand in hand to accomplish a worthy goal. Next slide, please. More recently, in addition to yearly advocacy for DCR's annual budget, we've broadened our focus to identifying, supporting, and rallying the hundreds of friends groups and other stakeholders to be a unified voice for DCR and our parks. Next slide, please. Which brings us to tonight's topic, DCR's capital budget and the role environmental bond bills play in setting the agency's annual capital spending plan. Here are just a few projects DCR is taking on this fiscal year with bonding authorizations passed in the 2018 environmental bond bill. This is just a small number of projects DCR has in its $152.4 million annual capital budget. Next slide, please. This morning, I attended the governor's unveiling of this year's environmental bond, a new 5-year capital spending plan for all of the environmental agencies. Here are a few DCR highlights from this bill that was filed with the legislature today. Once the bill is passed, likely next year, the administration will allow a portion of these bonding authorizations to go forward to complete projects under these broad headings. Next slide, please. Once again, I thank you all for coming to this event. Next slide, please. And now I'm going to turn the mic back over to our moderator, Tom McShane, to introduce our esteemed panel. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Doug. Um, as you all know, today is a very big day for those of us in the environmental advocacy community. As Doug just mentioned, the governor earlier today unveiled the long-awaited environmental bond bill, which is now formally named the Mass Ready Act. So we'll hear about that term in the future. The Mass Ready Act is a $2.9 billion bill designed to preserve the people, places, and nature that make Massachusetts so special. But this is just the beginning. So when the governor files her bond bill, as she did today, that kicks off the legislative process, and the House and the Senate will now shape what the final law will ultimately look like. This automatically becomes the top legislative priority for the entire land preservation and recreation community. It wasn't designed this way when we first planned tonight's summit, but it may be true kismet that the governor filed her bond bill and us holding tonight's session occurring on the same day may be a good harbinger of things to come. We want to talk as a community about how we might influence that. We have four great panelists who kindly agreed to talk to us tonight about the bond bill, and we quite literally could not have four better coaches as we go into this. Uh, First of all, we have Paul Janergy, and Paul is the first and only, so far, director of the Massachusetts Office of Outdoor Recreation. Paul has also been a senior member of the Secretary Tepper's staff who put the bond bill together, and he'll be able to give us a good insight into what is in the bill and how was it developed. Secondly, we have two of our true all-time state champions for the environment, Senator Steve Brewer and Senator Bob Durand. Steve Brewer was in the Senate for 18 years and ended up as the chair of the Senate Committee on Ways and Means. For those of you who don't know, we all feel that the chair of the Ways and Means Committee is often more powerful and more influential than the Senate president herself. But Steve would never say that. Throughout his career in both the House and the Senate, Steve was always a go-to person for the environmental community, and he has championed 5 environmental bond bills through the legislature. He's still active at the local level as a member of the East Quabbin Land Trust. Bob Durand, God love him. Bob Durand is our champion of all times. I'll have to throw in a word about John DeVillers, so just mention that. But Bob not only served as in the House and in the Senate, but he also served as the Secretary of Environmental Affairs. So he has seen these bond bills both being put together from the executive side as well as from the legislative side. And Bob also served as the chairman of the Natural Resources Committee. He's now president of Durand and Anastas Association, and he'll be able to give us that rare experience of having been on both sides of the branches to tell us what we should be doing next. Laura Jasinski. Laura is currently a member of the DCR Stewardship Council, which is a very important role for us. But she's also the executive director of the Charles River Conservation Conservancy. Laura has 15 years in the environmental land preservation community as an advocate for urban open space and community engagement. And we're thrilled that Laura will be here to talk a little bit about how we as a community can better collaborate and organize ourselves for this. So I think it would make sense to start with Paul a little bit. And if Paul, why don't you give us some idea of what is in the Mass Ready Act that was filed today and how it was developed over time?
Yeah, thanks, Tom, and thrilled to be here and so great to see everybody here. As Tom said, I am the director of the Massachusetts Office of Outdoor Recreation at EEA, but I have come with 23 years with DCR, both in urban forestry and our Trails and Greenways program. So it's great to see so many of you. Highlights for the environmental bond bill, and I think Kim may put some things in the links. We put out some briefs today that really go over it from a couple of different things, but it really is about investing in infrastructure, including DCR infrastructure, investments in water and nature, and investments in our communities, both through the municipal vulnerability preparedness program and through our farm programs. Putting together the environmental bond bill, well, let me say that on the DCR side, it authorizes broad categories, DCR investments in our parks and infrastructure of almost $590 million. It authorizes $176 million for DCR roads and bridges and multimodal infrastructure. It authorizes $40 million for land acquisition, $20 million for tree planting programs and urban forestry, and also $308 million for flood control, inland flooding, waterways programs within DCR, including dam safety programs. That's at the broad level. Putting the bill together has been a long process. We started last summer at EEA, and it really started with listening. We listened to dozens of stakeholder groups, reached out, and folks came in, over 300 individuals. We identified what the sort of vision and results that we want to achieve in the next 5 years are. The agencies worked together to put together what the aspirational ask is for the future for authorization. That also included not just the bond authorizations, but also a number of policy proposals to help achieve what we need to in the future. There was prioritizing, paring down, reprioritizing. Things have changed since we started this, most notably on the federal front. And then, that finalized in the proposal that was released today, $2.9 billion bond authorization proposal with something like a dozen policy proposals as well. So that's sort of the broad overview.
Great. Thank you, Paul. I think we'll probably have lots of questions for you later on about some of those details. For those of us, some of us, those sound like big numbers and lots of pockets, but I know that inside there are some real details that we're going to want to figure out how it matters to our individual parks and open spaces. Before we do that, though, I'd love to turn to Senator Brewer for a minute, as I really need to emphasize to everybody on the call, in spite of all that Paul has talked about, what's gone into the development of this is just the start. So this is now the governor's idea for the vision of open space, land preservation, infrastructure for going forward. And the legislature, both the House and the Senate, will now take that proposal and separately go through it, change it, agree with some things, disagree with some things, and go through a process in each of the chambers about what they think the vision should be. Senator Brewer, who's been in the House and the Senate, who's championed 5 of these through, and has a better sense than most of what the environmental advocacy community can and should be doing at this point. I'd love to get your ideas on, we're at the embarking on the start of this, Senator. What's your advice to us?
Thank you, Tom. last night we had a little dress rehearsal for this meeting, and a takeaway question was, what do they really do? What does the legislature really do now? First of all, to Paul, we need to have great respect for those who have built this document to this point. The listening tour from the Berkshires to the Cape, to the North Shore. And I suspect that the vast amount of what your work has done will be in the final document, number one. Number two is, and I said this with humor only to get the point across. You cannot drag a Christmas tree through the House chamber and not have every member want to decorate it. And 160 state representatives or 40 state senators will want to effectuate certain things in this document for their own districts. That's how the process works. It is now in their hands. The agencies have done their due diligence, and their input will be very important to Ways and Means and to the bonding committee and to A&F later on relative to all of this. But what the group in this call, what left me with a huge incentive when I was chairman of Senate Ways and Means was when a letter went, and on the side of the letterhead was 180 agencies of the Commonwealth, whether it's the Dune Buggy Associations or Trout Unlimited or Mass Audubon or every other entity that is out there, handicaps accessibility, all of these things. When that document, a short 2-page letter advocating for that, says, oh my God, this is motherhood and apple pie. Everybody wants to be on. So I encourage you people to make sure that everybody that's in your catchment area weighs in on this with their own legislators. Now, the nuts and bolts of this thing, and I revised my thinking after looking at this overall document, this Mass Ready Act today, that it may be parceled out because these housing development issues under Secretary Augustus and planning, streamlining planning, which the governor is really an advocate for, cutting as much red tape as possible. It may be parceled out to a housing committee, certainly to the bonding committee and Ways and Means and the Environmental Affairs Committee. Secretary Duran had told me that they definitely want to have a piece of this action as well. So it will be a long slug, and certainly because we're doing something in a very uncertain time. 5 years is enormous in our lifetimes, as we know how fast things are changing, especially with federal support or lack thereof, or certain priorities. Climate change has been an enormous aspect of all of these things. COVID brought people into our parks, our rail trails, and all of these things. So, but it will be important for each of you to buttonhole at their office hours as best as possible, and through electronic media, obviously, to make your point. And make sure that you have media that gets the Boston Globe on your side for all of these things to give us. Now, at the end of the day, will this bond bill pass? Yes, it will. Of course it will. We can't walk away from these things. The economic advantage of tourism, because we have great parks. I have a wife that comes from New Jersey, and you often say, oh, you're from New Jersey? What exit? And we're not like that in Massachusetts. We're within driving distance of a vast resource of skiing trails, of beaches and parks and waterfalls and nature and all of these things, to make sure that your legislators know that this is hugely important and they can add their priorities. And if they get into the document, fine. Administration of Finance, at the end of the day, will dole out resources with the advice and consent, obviously, of the governor, the lieutenant governor, and the secretary of A&F to do this. But it's about, this is your government. This is not the legislature's government, but they're the ones who will be acting at your behest in this regard on a positive way. Let me tell you, folks, I've got anecdotal evidence where during COVID, the parking lots for these trails were full. People, and as I said last night in our briefing, You want to take your wife, your spouse, your partner, and 2 kids to Fenway Park, you're out $800. You can, in that one event, you can do these trails and have memories that will last a lifetime for your family in a cost-effective measure. And those are the kind of messaging that we want. And how far we have come. We were kidding earlier how when Secretary Duran and Governor Weld dove into the Charles River, and how far the Charles River has come by pouring money into the Boston Harbor and clean up all of these areas. Protection of 58,000 acres of the Quabbin Reservoir, the Ware River watershed, Wachusett Reservoir, all of these things are about this. So be an unabashed, proud supporter of these passions that we have.
Great. Thank you, Steve. Um, that's, it's intriguing to me because one of the things that I'd love to come back and ask you about is the idea of if we buttonholing our local legislators because we care so much about Walden Woods, for instance, and so we buttonhole, Senator Barrett that we want something for Walden Woods. Um, how is that? We don't want it to become a Christmas tree, but we want to make sure we've got something in there for Walden Woods. How do you avoid becoming a Christmas tree item that may be frowned upon by the executive branch?
Well, first of all, these bond bills, they expect them to be Christmas trees, quite honestly. They expect it. And they have the final say of what gets released through the secretary of the particular agency that will have that done. It's okay, because all that does, if these earmarks are in there, gets you to first base. It does not get you to home plate. It just gets you to first base. And it's a 5-year bond or a 6-year bond. And I wouldn't frown on that at all, because if that legislator, if it's Senator Barrett that advocates for Walden Pond, you can't advocate for that without advocating for the document as a whole as well. So there is no negative in that regard.
Great, great, thank you. Senator Secretary Durand, as somebody who has seen this on both sides of the fence, I'm curious, do you think, first of all, do we have to worry about this becoming too weighty a lift? Oftentimes, a bond bill can become, as Senator Brewer just mentioned, it can become a Christmas tree. And sometimes these things just become too weighty to get through the legislature. Our number one priority is to make sure that this passes through the legislature. And so what's your advice as how do we influence both the executive and legislative branch and leverage one against the other? Or maybe we don't leverage one against the other, but how do we leverage them both so that we get the outcome we'd like?
First, I want to give the administration tremendous credit for Stephanie Cooper and Paul and others, the secretary. When you have the AFL-CIO president stand up and endorse a bill, and the next speaker is Tamara Small from NAIOC endorsing the bill, and of course all of us, all the NGOs as well. That's incredible. It shows that you've done the homework. And this administration not only did their homework in terms of providing a coalition of NGOs, the environmental group, to help come up with the bill, but they also last week spent a whole week debriefing everybody, calling them. I got calls from Stephanie Cooper, and I know others. I know Tom was on a call with Lieutenant Governor. That's incredible. I can't remember an administration has done the homework that these guys have done to date. So kudos to Paul, his team, to the administration on this. But the next step, as Steve Brewer pointed out, was the legislature. When Steve and I was there, there's an old saying, right? The administration proposes and the legislature disposes. So just because we have an environmental bond bill before us, or Mass Ready Act, whatever you want to call it, doesn't mean that's not going to change. And it could change significantly depending on, what the leadership in the House and the Senate want. And that's why it's important for Mass Parks for All to be the umbrella organization, this great team that you've developed, Doug Peasy, Chuck, Tom, Michelle, others, Henry, to be the umbrella organization for all the friends groups that are out there, right? So you need to bring your concerns to them, to Mass Parks for All, and you need to be there for Mass Parks for All when they ask you to pick up the phone and ask your legislator to come to a trail, to come to a park, to come to Walden Woods or to, an urban parkway. It's all, legislators are just like us, right? We're all humans. We need to be educated. And that's the job of the people on this phone, on the Zoom call tonight, is to educate the legislators relative to what's in the environmental bond and what needs to be in the environmental bond that may have been overlooked. As Steve said, this is going to pass. It may take a while. And I predict, every environmental bond bill I was involved with, both in the Senate as secretary, right, never happened unless it was election year. So don't expect this to pass this fall. It's not going to, right? It's going to happen in election year so legislators can say, oh, I brought home this, I brought home that. So it's a process, but it's a good process. Now, once it's passed, what happens? The administration gets it, and they go to, I'm on the Fish and Wildlife Board, they'll go to Tom O'Shea, Commissioner of Fisheries and Wildlife, and they'll say, you have this much authorization in this account, this is what you have, right? So there's another whole lobbying effort that can go on there, and there's slippage and everything else I could talk about, but I don't want to bore you there. Let's start with the legislative work that needs to be done right now. Ultimately, the administration holds the cards in terms of authorization of these funds. So we need to keep cognizant of the fact that this administration will continue to be involved through the legislative process, through the House, through the Senate. And, while we're getting support from legislators, we also need to check in on occasion with the administration, because ultimately they'll have the final say. Not only this administration, the future administration, if the case, this administration doesn't survive the next election, right? Which happens, right? So it's a 5-year bond. I expect to see a lot from Mass Parks for All. My former business partner and my former press secretary are leading the effort there, and you guys, done a great job to date setting this up. I think we're going to see some great things this year. I was excited to see the funding for dam removal, something we worked on years ago, culvert improvements, open space, a biodiversity grant program, restoration in McLaughlin, fish hatchery, also some reform for MPA, for Chapter 91, for wetlands reform and regulation to make it easier for those of us working to remove those dams, to move those culverts, to improve our residency along the coast, make it easier by going through the regulatory process and saying what's necessary and what's not necessary, right? So that's in there as well, which is incredible. It's probably why they got some support from NAOP today as well. But it's a good coalition, and like Steve said, I think we have a winner here if we all work together. So looking forward to being part of the team.
Thank you, Bob. Laura, I'd love to ask you 2 questions, actually. The first one is how we, as an open space and community engagement community, can collaborate better. This is the first time that the environmental community all got together and formed the Bond Bill Coalition, even in advance, to advise Paul and the secretary and the administration. And I thought that was a great start. So the question first is, how do we make sure that we keep that sort of collaboration within the community going? And what advice do you have there? And secondly, because of your work on the Charles River in particular, how do you see the impact of this bill. As Paul went through it, and I mentioned, it sounds like big buckets of money, lots of numbers, but how does that get translated in your mind down to an actual project that fixes the sailing club over on the Charles River, who needs a new dock, et cetera? So if you could just give us your insights in terms of both collaboration and the importance of this bill for somebody who's actually managing resources on the ground.
Thanks, Tom. That seems appropriate to have two questions, given that I'm kind of wearing two hats in this conversation. So, and thanks to everybody for your comments. And again, thanks for all the work that went into just getting to this point with the bond bill, and for Mass Parks for having this conversation. I think that really is kind of I think is incredibly key, is that there is how we come together around an organization like Mass Parks for All, how we keep trying to kind of grow this community and continue that practice that I think has been started with this bond bill in terms of asking people for their feedback. So I think really the challenge is ahead for us and for Mass Parks for All to continue saying, how do we keep working together and to provide these forums? And also provide these forums to learn. I will say that as someone who is kind of, in the work, and like I think a lot of folks on this call, working with friends groups, working in particular DCR Park or, public park, there's so much to do in a given day or so much in a given property that, we know that these big, kind of legislative moves like a bond bill are so important. And yet we also have like 10% of our capacity to spend on it, right? So it's great to provide these forums to come together and to learn about how we can be most effective, how you can really use your time well. And I think that is really in coalition. I think we've seen a really big uptick since the DCR Special Commission, which I also had the pleasure of sitting on that body to really take a look at how we can improve and better support our state agencies. So it's really great to just be at this point where we're seeing kind of the fruits of some of those recommendations come forth. So I would say as we said, the work starts now, and so it's even more important to find opportunities to work together. I think that can be through Mass Parks, and then kind of, switching to my stewardship council hat, my hope is also that that's what the stewardship council can also provide a forum for. As an independent body that is, in place, appointed by the governor, but to kind of provide oversight and transparency for the agency. I think both the stewardship council meetings themselves, which are monthly, would love to see us increase attendance there, increase kind of partnership presentations, people talking about what's important in their parks and how that connects to the bond bill. I think would be a great use of that body and that kind of public forum, as well as some of the committees, like the stakeholder committee, which I know has been reformed. And so just to put a plug there, I know the Stewardship Council's next meeting is this coming Thursday. If you're looking for an opportunity to get out to the Harbor Islands this summer, now is your chance. Jump on a ferry and attend in person, or there's also a Zoom option for hybrid. And I know Commissioner Arrigo is planning on talking about some of these more specific items in the bond bill and addressing this in that presentation. So that's Thursday at 10. So encourage people to kind of come back and increasingly use that as a forum to continue these conversations and learn about what our partners' priorities are, and then follow up after. And as both Senator Durand and Brewer mentioned, get together, make those collective asks to our elected officials, and educate them as to why these line items are important. Why dam infrastructure is important to resilience, right? I think that's a huge part of it. And then to your second question, what for an organization like ours, how do we activate this? In some ways, I would even turn to some of our colleagues and are just kind of digging into this ourselves. Again, would be to think about how do we really leverage in part the attention, and think about how we can help leverage funding by bringing some private dollars to the table as well, right? To think about how we can exponentially increase the resources that are going and leverage the state and the public funding and investment, and use that to also get private entities to do the same. I think that's what friends groups are really good at and are really there to do. So I think it'll be really important to work with our partners, particularly at DCR, to understand how they see. And I know Patrice is on. If she let her jump in if there's anything particular she wants to. But anything that they see as critically important, and how we can partner on some of those shared priorities, and really how, what our role can be in supporting DCR and activating that. I'm excited to see a lot in there. I'm excited to see things, things like forestry and tree planting, and just really thinking about that as infrastructure in a different way for climate resilience. Really excited to see things like parkways. Again, that's a huge issue, especially along the Charles River. I think that's one that we'll definitely dive into and follow closely and work to build coalition, not only with a lot of folks on this call that are maybe focused on parks, but also our partners in transportation, and think about how we can really leverage that.
Thank you. As I was driving through Connecticut this past weekend on the Merritt Parkway, I kept thinking, boy, this infusion to our parkways here is so well needed. They've done a beautiful job in Connecticut of redoing the bridges and just making it a much more attractive place. So I'm thrilled with the parkways funding. I guess the thing that I am oh, sorry, Senator Brewer.
I just wanted to add, it usually would be better for me to say this at the conclusion of this meeting, but at my age, it's better to get it up before I forget it anyway, is that keeping the coalition together. Right now, we've got 41 people, I believe, in this participating. We've got an electronic medium, and we've actually got the bugs worked out of being able to communicate with each other now. My present company excluded as far as that goes. But as Secretary Duran said, this is going to be a multi-month, maybe into next year process. And we should commit ourselves to try to get back 6 months from now to find out. And because it will be a moving target. The second thing I wanted to mention is outside sections. Sometimes outside sections are the things that things get caught up on, and people that are opposed to them would say this should be a standalone bill and we should debate this in and of itself. So be mindful of that. But I think we should commit ourselves to getting back here. Again, it's certainly with a Zoom call, not all that much of a heavy lift to do that. So now I take my hand down.
That is perfectly that's perfect advice, and that's exactly where I wanted you to be going. So great, thank you. I mean, my concern is that we now have a long process. So for those of you who aren't as familiar with the legislative process as the senators and Doug, et cetera, this now goes to the House. It will be referred to one, two, maybe even three different committees at this point. It will also be referred to separately to Senate committees. And those committees may have hearings, they may deliberate for a short period of time or a long period of time. We could have ultimately, 6 different public hearings on this bill or more. And then we have floor action in the House before they finish it, and it then goes over to the Senate, and the Senate will have their committee hearings and their Senate floor action. And then there's the ultimate important conference committee where the House and the Senate will jive the House and mesh the two bills together. So we've got months ahead of us. Is it important for people to be showing up at hearings? Is it more important for people to be doing the work with the local legislators? Is it more important for those sorts of letters with all of the organizations listed? What is going to be the most important thing that we all should be doing at this point, looking down the road for the next 9 months potentially?
I don't know how to raise my hand like Steve Brewer, but let me just let me jump in. Yeah, that's where.
Wrong button.
Wrong button is right. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Okay.
We can hear you. We just can't see you, Bob.
I got 59%. See, that's what I mean. I'm technologically challenged, as Kim and Chuck will tell you.
We can still hear you, Bob.
Well, he's on mute now.
Okay. So let me just finish my thought before I try to figure out how to get back on. So that's where Mass Parks for All comes in, right? So Mass Parks for All is going to be, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So
Okay.
Mass Parks for All is the umbrella organization, can lead you through that process. For those of you who are members of friends groups or NGOs, throughout this process, do we need a particular legislator? By interacting with them locally, they may call Friends of the Fells. Do we need 30 people to show up at a hearing? Mass Park for All can help coordinate that. Do we need someone to go to 3 fundraisers for the Senate President, the Ways and Means Chairman, and the Chairman of the Bonding Committee? Yeah, we can do that. We got some people here who can afford to write a few checks. All helps. So it's sort of a combination of all. But I think Mass Park for All needs to be, the coordinating agent group that advises folks how to do on your own.
You mentioned the Senate President. I mean, how much do we need to be focusing on leadership versus our local legislators?
Well, if I may, Tom, all politics is local. And if there's projects in Ashland or in Framingham, then Senate President Spilka will have a keen interest in those aspects. And those constituents, I said it, I'll say it a second time, all politics is local. And that Senator Spilka will be receptive to hearing from her constituents in that regard. And Speaker Mariano, who just announced today that he will run for re-election. He just announced today he will run for re-election as Speaker of the House. And so the key on those aspects in Weymouth and all the South Weymouth Naval Air Station and whatever particular things that are parochial to them, and to Mike Rodrigues, the chairman of Ways and Means, and Aaron Mishnowitz. Those are all critically important because the buck stops there to a great degree in that regard. Now, most of you are seasoned veterans of the process. Public hearings are important, and I would never discourage anyone, but you're going to get 3 minutes, and you might wait 4 hours before, if there's a lot, because as has been said, not everyone has said it. Everything has been said, but not everyone has said it. And it can be somewhat frustrating in that regard. But to buttonhole your legislators, emails, and consistent aspects of that, so they know you're not going away. They know that you're passionate, you care about it. Always be respectful. Always ask them to do the best that you can.
Here's an example. So if any of you have been to the Mass Wildlife headquarters in Westboro. So I am Secretary of Environmental Affairs. I'm about to leave. I know I'm going to leave. My good friend Carl Prescott, who's Assistant Director, I said to him, Carl, what do you need before I leave? He goes, we need a new building. So I got the design and planning money in that bond bill. It took 12 years to build, but that's a LEED certified, one of the best state buildings in the Commonwealth history. And we're about to do the McLaughlin Fish Hatchery as a result of this bond as well, hopefully. $20 million for that. So that's how it happens. And it happens, like Steve said, the one-on-one, working with leadership, but your legislators can also play a role by talking to leadership, particularly those legislators who are chairman of a committee, who have regular meetings with leadership, division chairs, the others in the leadership quirk. It's important to engage them, and you all know who they are. You go on Mass General Court, .com, you come up with the legislator in your district. You call them up and you say, I want you to take, I want, would you be willing to take a walk on this trail with our friends group? They walk the trail. At the end of the little picnic lunch, and you say, this is what we would like to have an environmental bond bill. Can you deliver this for us? It's that simple.
I want to. I'm going to put Paul back on the hot seat a little bit right now, because one of the things that both Senator Brewer and Senator Durand are pointing out is keep the coalition together, keep us organized and focused, and keep us ready and engaged. Um, and one of the things, Paul, that strikes me that scares me a little bit. We're used to environmental bonds that have pots of money for various programs and very little in terms of outside sections. The administration has done, as Bob pointed out, an unbelievably good job of bringing people together in the development of this bill. But the environmental bond that's filed from an environmental point of view has pluses and minuses. When I was lobbying for environmental affairs in the legislature, and we got Chapter 91 through, thank you, Senator Brewer, thank you, Senator Durand, and we got the Wetlands Protection Act strengthened by adding wildlife as a cause. And the third rail that we never wanted to put into the legislature was MIPA, because the business community is so uh, potentially tempted to do bad things if you open those up. How did the administration come to putting together an environmental bond that has all the pluses in terms of the funding, but some real potential negatives in terms of the outside sections? And how did you see keeping the coalition together from the administration's point of view?
Thanks, Tom. I will try to answer this question. I may answer it both personally and also representing the administration here. And I would say that I really do not see many of those outside sections as negative from an environmental point of view. So just to sort of help the audience understand, there are some really important things in a couple of areas. One is resilience. There are some opportunities to really I think understanding that the status quo for the environment may not be enough for the future. We really need to do nature-based ecological restoration. We need to have more resilient landscapes. We need to have more resilient coastlines. And to make that happen, good projects benefit from some streamlining in the permitting process. Right now, we have a lot of process, and sometimes that hampers the really environmentally positive product at the end of the day. So the permit streamlining and the resilience pieces in the environmental bond bill, I think, are really important for getting us to where we need to be as environmental community for the future. And I think if you dig into the details of what the proposed changes are, they maintain the high standards that we have for environmental protection in Massachusetts. They try to cut down on the red tape, but they maintain the high standards for environmental protection. And so I guess I do hope that this coalition, sort of can get behind that and advocate for those kinds of things, because I really do think they're important for our future. And I guess just on the coalition front, I wanted to mention this is an amazing coalition. Mass Parks for All has done an amazing job bringing together a diverse coalition. There is an opportunity to make that coalition even more diverse. We used to think parks were nice places to go outside and visit and play, but they are critical for public health. They are critical for resilience in our communities. And they, are critical for our economies and our tourisms, particularly our local economies. So I think if you can go out and talk to your chamber, talk to your public health community and get them as a part of your coalition here, that will make this all the stronger.
Paul, seeing the outdoor recreation economic development community participating more? I mean, is REI going to be a target for expanding our coalition, et cetera? And how do we do that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so one, through my office, we're actually trying to help bring together the Outdoor Recreation Business Alliance community. So, I hope to connect folks with that. There's a guiding community out there that does programming. There are retailers out there. Bring those folks in. The parks and the parks investments are critical to those. Massachusetts is not the place you drive through to go outside to play. Massachusetts is the place you stay to play. And I will tout this stat. Last year, we had the fastest growing outdoor recreation economy in the country at over 13%. So let's keep it moving.
Great. Terrific. Senator Brewer?
A clarion call. Sooner or later, somebody will oppose some part of this bill. Make no mistake about it. Do not despair. And I just want to tell you a little story about my friend, Bob Durand. I went to a real estate roundtable with 200 people in a Holiday Inn, and they were screaming blood about the Rivers Protection Act. Bob Durand gets up. They're all in there. They got all their really nice cars. They're making good money on real estate. And he goes, folks, show me a dirty river, and I'll show you depressed property values. Show me a clean river, and I'll show you enhanced property values. Case closed, end of discussion. So don't despair, because the good always wins.
True story. Thanks.
Bravo. Well, I'm thrilled with the nature-based resiliency stuff. And Paul, for those of you who haven't followed it, to tap into Boston Harbor Now and the Stone Living Lab and the stuff that they're researching there is tremendous. So I'm thrilled with that. Is there anything that any of the four of you would like to add before we throw this to questions and answers?
I'd like to hear from Patrice. She's been around for a long time. She's like the expert.
She is our expert. And Patrice, anything that
Not
you
to
can
put you
give
on the
us in
spot.
terms of insight into what we're all excited about, which is the DCR dashboard, would be terrific.
Sure. Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and it's really kind of a trip down memory lane, seeing so many old friends and former colleagues. I'm just loving hearing the conversation, and it's taking me back to a very positive and impactful period of time, at least in my career. So, thank you. I also just really want to thank the coalition for all of the support and advocacy that you have been undertaking over the last year and a half or so for DCR. We really appreciate it. So one of the kind of exciting initiatives that DCR has been working on is the development of a comprehensive capital planning and project delivery tool. This is a project that came directly out of the special commission, which identified that DCR had a lot of work to do in terms of redesigning our capital planning process. So we have launched a kind of multidisciplinary initiative that's been we've been involved in it for about a year and a half now to improve the process. And the goals of the initiative are first and foremost to make DCR's capital planning process more transparent by adding meaningful stakeholder input throughout the process. We also want to improve our efficiency by incorporating technology, get rid of the abacus, and kind of bring on the technology to support this new process. I think we also, one of our goals is really to increase predictability and parity in our capital investment decision making, so that DCR's investments are being made kind of across the state on kind of various aspects, that there's parity in all communities. And then finally, incorporating more data into our decision making. So what this tool will do is it will allow DCR to plan and track our capital planning from cradle to grave. And it will also provide visibility into what many consider a black box. And it will provide lots of opportunity at various milestones for public input and engagement. So we're very, very excited about that. I think the thing that will be really great for the community is we really intend to have a very robust public facing component to this capital planning tool. So there will be an opportunity to see DCR's 5-year capital plan forecast. You'll be able to see project locations through maps and dashboards. You'll be able to see projects by location and by the type of investment. And so, when people ask the question, how's DCR doing on, whittling down that backlog of deferred maintenance, you'll be able to see, given our capital budget, how much of those resources are being dedicated towards deferred maintenance, where we're investing in environmental justice communities, how much money we're spending on transportation assets. So, the big goal here is to really kind of pull away the curtain and provide exposure and visibility into DCR's capital planning. So this is a tool that we're in the process of developing. It's going to be rolled out in phases, and the first big go live milestone will be next spring of 2026. So very excited, and hopefully it'll be a really useful tool for all of you.
Great. We're very excited about that. Thank you, Patrice. One of the things that always amazes me is when I talk about DCR to people and I say, yeah, they're the ones who own Plymouth Rock and they own Nantasket Beach and they own, the Wachusett Mountain Ski Resort. I mean, it's amazing the array of facilities that DCR has under their purview. And so this will be a very exciting thing for us to see this. So thank you.
Well, I would just add, people think of DCR as a parks agency, but we have a pretty extensive portfolio of significant critical infrastructure, which includes 2 major flood control dams, one on the Charles River and the Mystic River, miles and miles of parkways, other flood control facilities throughout the Commonwealth. So DCR is, we love our parks, but we are definitely more than parks.
Boston Harbor.
Here we call it DCR, Damn Clean Reservoir.
My story that I'll tell, my anecdote, is that I had the pleasure of working for 4 different secretaries of environmental affairs. And I won't say which one it was, but at one point I'm driving to work one morning and they're saying that we're going to get hit with a hurricane and we have to prepare. And I get to the office and I say to the secretary, well, we should get the commissioners together and, plan for this big storm. And she said, well, what do we have to plan? And I said, well, the first thing you have to do is lower the Charles River. And the secretary looked at me like, we lower the Charles River? And I said, yes, you do. And it's through the DCR dam program. So there's a lot going on there. It's not often that we get not only these 4 incredible environmental leaders together, Bob and Steve and Laura, but also to have Patrice on board and Kerry on board. It's a great opportunity for us to ask questions. So, Kim, I think that it would be smart to open things up for questions. And I see, well, no, I saw Michelle had her microphone off. But Kim, if you want to take it over and see if there's any questions that people have for either any of the 4 panelists, or for Patrice or Kerry, or even for Michelle and Doug from Mass Parks for All. Feel free to ask away.
Certainly. So, folks, if you'd like to either plug a question that you have into the chat at the bottom of your screen, or use the hand raising feature that Senator Brewer is such an expert on, feel free to do that as well. And we'll go one by one. Please unmute yourself if you're going for the latter, and we'll get this started here.
In the meantime, let me ask one last question of the panelists, which Senator Brewer mentioned at the beginning. You mentioned the Boston Globe. And, in the Middle Ages, when I was doing legislative work, it was always critical to get to the Boston Globe editorial board if you wanted to try to get a major bill through the legislature like this. In this day and age where our news media is kind of shattered, um, is that those op-eds? Is it op-eds? Is it editorials? Is it news articles about particular parks? How does the media influence the legislative process at this point?
I would say your executive director has the
Good,
biggest
Bob.
experience there. Doug Pizia, for those of you who don't know, worked for a number of different newspapers, including the Lowell Sun, the Metro West Daily News, the Hudson Marlboro Enterprise, and Doug was my press secretary when I was secretary. So I would defer that question, Tom, to Doug.
Thanks, Bob. Yeah, I spent a good dozen years as a newspaper reporter, and then in an even more distant past, started out as a news intern at WBCN, the Rock of Boston, which was an experience I could talk about for years, but I won't go into here. I think it is difficult. The media is fragmented. It is really difficult to get news coverage on stuff. I actually have a page that if I could share about some of the press stuff that we've got here. When we did our state park summit, we got quite a bit of press on that all over the state. So the bottom line is you have to go out and recruit that thing. And it is difficult to get in to see the Globe. I actually know somebody on the editorial board there and was conversing with her recently about that. And it's one of those things that I will continue to do. And it is something that we as Mass Parks for All should start a more earnest effort to do media stuff. So. But it's hard. I'll leave it at this. I did a lot of media consulting for a variety of clients before I landed here, in between state government and here. And I'll just give you a quick example. I was doing press for a high-end antique show at the Wayside Inn, which is in Sudbury. And I had a difficult time getting the Lincoln Journal, which is right next door, to run an advance piece on this thing because it wasn't happening in Lincoln. So that was a long time ago that was happening. So you definitely have to be persistent. You definitely have to make inroads with this community and kind of massage the relationship early and often. To do that.
I think one of the other things you could do, and we've done this in the past, and Doug's been helpful in this as well, is as you're talking to legislators, you say to the legislator, geez, we happen to have a reporter who's interested in, the environmental bond bill, and, he's interested in taking a walk on this trail. Do you mind if he comes with us? Don't put the legislator on the spot unless you let them know first that there'll be press there, right? And then have them prepared to have a comment in support. So I think that's important. And once again, I would defer as a friends group to Mass Park for All for how to thread that needle. So, and social media today is everything, right? So you got to play on social media. You have to.
Yeah, we've definitely upped our game there, thanks to Kat. I see some questions in the chat here that we should probably get to.
Kim,
Sorry, I actually had one, if that's okay, if I could speak up. My name's Chris Redfern. I'm the executive director of the Friends of the Fells. And this has all been really very helpful for me in understanding how this process works. As another speaker said, I have about 5 to 10% of my brain that I can spend on advocacy related issues such as this bond bill. But I want to be effective in advocating for the fells. And I'm interested in advice on how do folks like Friends of the Fells trace the needs of our park in terms of capital needs and deferred maintenance and all those types of issues, to what's in this bill and how we can advocate for it locally and tell our local elected officials why they should be supporting this bill and how it would specifically affect some of the on-the-ground challenges that we have in the Middlesex Fells.
Anybody want to take that question?
I'll take a stab at that because there's another question in the chat um, from Pat Alvarez that is kind of similar, and it's about how the bill affects local projects, and it's in regard to Neponset River cleanup and how that might increase property values. There's another question in there about how if there's money in the bond bill to acquire land that might be that you might be able to leverage an existing piece of open space or actually create new open space from. And what I would tell you is that there's various pots of money in here. And one thing I would tell you to do, Chris, is really have that relationship, which I know you already have with the DCR folks at the park, and talk to them about what they need, and for your park in particular. And then go into, once the thing is in the legislature. I mean, the legislative bond bill that came out in 2018 is just a litany of earmarks put in by legislators. And so what I would do is, if you have a particular capital need for your park, and you and DCR agree that that's a serious capital need, I would try to get your legislative delegation that covers your area to get an earmark for that particular project into the actual bill. And then you would have it. And then, of course, that's the beginning of it, right? Well, maybe that's step two. And then basically you have to get the administration, to approve that spending over time. So, and if it's a project that takes a couple of years, it's something that has to cut across a couple of years if you have to bond for like 5 or 6 or 10 years for the project. So it really is kind of like a little of everything in there to actually get the project that you want done.
Thank you, Doug. There's another question in the chat from Melissa Nelson, who asks, will Mass Parks for All be creating a media kit for coalition members?
Yeah, I think once the bill gets filed, we are going to want to get press on this. So that's definitely something we could take on. We could definitely take that on as a project and try to help you, and then try to help with contacts. And that's kind of a two-way street too, because it would be great. One of the things that we have to do as an organization is we have to update our media list. We have a media list that is a bit fragmented, and we haven't had the bandwidth to go through that because we've been busy on the budget and some other projects. And we are a small organization. We have myself and Kat, my associate, as actual employees. So we have a very limited bandwidth in terms of what we can tackle. But if you guys in the friends groups have reporters that you're friendly with, and it would help to pass those contacts along to us as well.
Yeah, as a corollary kind of question, because so many of us have really our own media responsibilities and outreach that we do, is there going to be any effort? I know we're also strapped, it's hard to even conceptualize having time to do this, but have any kind of initial messaging that will help us all be consistent to some extent, not cookie cutter, but still similar enough in our messaging to the public? Is that something that Mass Parks for All would initiate, or is it a case where we could get into sharing mode? So if I create something that we're going to push out to Friends of the Blue Hills members, I would potentially share it with the members of the coalition, and then they could kind of massage it to their own needs. Has there been any thought to that, or is it too early?
No, I don't think it's too early. I mean, one of the things we've done since we've upped our social media game is we've had a lot of organizations share our social media stuff out there, and we're kind of at the beginning of that process. And again, there's only two of us who are paid staff for this. So, but that's definitely something. And again, it's kind of a two-way street. We would be happy to share stuff with you and have you guys share stuff with us. And one of the things that we've been able to do in terms of outreach through individuals, and this is mostly we've done this with legislators. We have a tool that allows people to plug their name and address into a form, and then we have some suggested language in the form to go to a legislature. For example, we just use that. The regular budget is going on now. There's a conference committee that's been appointed to rectify the two versions, the House and the Senate versions of the budget. We were able to get a $500,000 amendment on the Senate floor to DCR's operations budget. And that plus some money that some other senators put into that line item. We're looking at a potentially 3.7% increase in that account, which would get them above the 3% inflation. So what we did was we put a form out to our members, an email to our members asking them to contact their legislators, to ask their legislators to bang on the conference committee to support the Senate's number there. So we were able to do that kind of communication on a fairly broad basis on a number of issues. We haven't used that at all for media, but that's the kind of communication that we can provide, and that's the kind of communication that I think some of the friends groups would find helpful as well.
So
Yeah,
Melissa, just
go ahead, Michelle.
okay, thanks. Melissa, let's take that. We've got a couple meetings coming up of our board in the next couple weeks. I think that's really important. We didn't think about that. We thought about everything else, it seems like. But I think that's a really great way to start helping you guys out, is to get at least a group, sort of a group consensus on how we're going to deal with that, and give that to you within the next couple weeks.
I just wanted to jump in and say, Melissa, I thought that's a great point, and that we have people here from the Blue Hills, from the Fellsway, from Boston Harbor, from Walden, and every friends group should be doing their planning now for what they individually are going to do to try to advocate for this bill. But Mass Parks for All needs to figure out what Senator Brewer was saying, which is that we need a greater and more consistent communications amongst the friends groups so that we can keep the friends groups up to date on the progress of the bill, what's coming up for hearings or etc., as well as the friend saying, hey, I got my senator to do this walk, on July 25th, that we can all participate somehow in and keep in touch with. So Mass Parks for All needs to figure out that communication.
Tom, I just noticed that Pat's hand has been up for a while.
Pat has had her hand up forever. So Pat,
I appreciate that. And this gets back to something Doug said. I was just wondering if I'm asking this for a very specific reason. There is a very important piece of privately owned woodlands that we are trying to get protected for a lot of reasons, which I won't go into, but it's a critical piece of land. And I wondered if some funding, if we were able to get an earmark from the bond bill, to contribute for the full purchase price or part of the purchase price. In a case like that, would the land then go to the DCR, or could it be owned by the city? How does the bond bill work in that way?
So partnerships are always encouraged, right? The more partners you have, the greater chance you're going to get the funding, right? Because dollars go further. I guess I'd have to ask a couple of quick questions. Is this a large parcel of land or a small?
It's a 24-acre privately owned woodland that sits in a neighborhood that is basically would be a heat island without it. Yeah, and it's in
City?
this is in Boston, where Roslindale, Hyde Park, and Mattapan, those three neighborhoods, right where they intersect. And it's up on the, huh?
It's also helpful if there's some connectivity. Are there other parks around or?
There's nothing anywhere close enough to walk to, why it's so critical for us. And it's way up high. It gives an incredible view. It's got every manner of wildlife and types of tree canopy, and it is way up high. It overlooks, you can see for miles. It is
who's your state rep and your state senator?
Rob Consalvo, who I know very, very well, and I'm blanking on my states. Rush is the state senator.
Yeah, he's great. Yeah,
we've been involved, they know about it there, but trying to get it's a high price tag. And so I just wondered if, we've been trying to get the city to buy it. They don't have the level of resources it's going to take. And so we thought that maybe this could be a source, but again, would it fall under DCR then for ownership and management, or could the city still own and manage it? How does that work? Or is this a offline question?
Yeah, there are parks grants that DCR manages, right? Patrice, I think you still got the parks grants.
Well, we usually work with the city of Boston, the Community Preservation Act, or just the city to buy small parcels.
Yeah.
We've never had a situation where we've had to protect such a large parcel.
If you built a coalition around CPA, right? A friends group or a land trust, and go to your legislators, and then go back to DCR as an urban park, possibility, or even with the city. But
we have
get Mike Rush involved. I think would be really
the best way. Okay,
yeah.
we're working on that, and we have a coalition.
Pat, this is a good time because it's going to be a while before stuff happens, but it's a good time for you to ask for a meeting with Senator Rush and Brian Sweat from the city, and ask someone from Mass Parks for All to be there, and potentially somebody from DCR. And let's sit down and figure out what's the best way to structure something. Because I think it sounds as though this may be the sort of project that the city should end up owning, not DCR. But it would be, now's the time to get those four entities, the city, the state, you and your legislators together to say, hey, this is what we care about. How do we make sure this gets included in the bill?
Yeah.
Thank you. That's great advice.
Jen just pointed out, the Trust for Public Land does this all the time too. So they'd be a good resource.
Yeah, or trustees of reservations.
Or the trustees, yeah.
Okay, yeah, we've been working with the city, working very hard, but this is good. Trustees of reservations and Trust for Public Land and all the others. I've written down everything you've said. Thank you so much. I'll follow up.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
So I think we're coming
Mr.
up on
Constable.
time here. Yes, I was going to ask Buzz if he wanted to ask away.
Well, thank you. Well, first, particularly if we're almost done with time, it's almost time for the thanks. As a member of with Laura of the Special Commission, I really want to thank Matthew and Stephanie Cooper and Commissioner Arrigo for really following the tenor of what the Special Commission was hoping for. And I think there's been a significant change in DCR, which is better for all of us, including the NGOs, the Friends and the other NGOs. And of course, it's wonderful to see everybody here. And although some of us are old, I think it's really good that there are a number of young people here who really are there. There is an evolution. That's a really important evolution. So I speak up. I was gonna tweak Tom because the Mass for Parks, it ought to be and is, and we all support them for really coordinating not only the friends groups but the be the strongest spokesman for DCR. But there is a bond coalition, which Doug is on, that is much larger, that has 20 or 30 people, including not only the major land trusts of the state, but also other watershed associations and folks like that. And Doug is an active member of that. So the idea that this group may focus on DCR particular, and but Doug can help coordinate you and really needs to, but he also participates in this larger bond coalition, and we're all out there. So if the trustees of the reservations, which I happen to be on the board of, hadn't been brought up, I would have brought them up, because they could work, whether it's Crane's Ledge or the White Stadium or Windsor State Park. We can all work together to have this done. So there's a bigger group than what we have here today, and we can all work together. But the group that's here is really wonderful. So thank you all, including all you guys who organized this. Thank you, Tom.
Age is a
Thank you, Todd.
mindset. Don't never forget that.
Yeah.
So,
And
you know, Bill
Bill-
Bowles and I are going to start figuring out how to get more of this for the Cape, I want you to know. But other than that, as we said earlier, this is just today marks the beginning. And so Michelle and Doug will give us some guidance on how we'll keep this group together and alive and activated. But on behalf of Michelle and Doug and the entire board, I just want to thank you, Senator Brewer, Senator Durand, Laura, and Paul, and all of you for participating tonight. This was great. I think we all need to go find a cool swimming hole somewhere right now. And congratulations to the Healy administration, because this is a great start. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Rob.
Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you, everybody.
Bye, guys.
Good night. Let me get out of here.